Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this webinar series that we are starting this month from Core Design. And we're going to cover three topics in these 3 months. One today about RFPs. The next one will be by the end of October, that we will be talking about return of investment. And in November, around mid-November, we will cover the topic on how to transform WFM in a high-performance tool. So hopefully these three topics will be of your interest. And today we're gonna discuss for the next around 25-30 minutes, no more than that, the tool of RFPs that has become a standard in the industry. One of the standards in the industry to choose a WFM tool when companies are actually in the selections process. So let's get started. And first of all, let's define a little bit what's an RFP. For some of you or the people that are watching this webinar that have been involved before in an RFP, most probably you already know this, okay? But the ones that are relatively new to this process, basically, an RFP is a process launched by a company by which the company selects a number of providers in the industry. Normally, this number is between 3 and 7, and they share a number of documents and information with these providers so they can actually send them answers to these questions that they go across different topics, from functional items to technical items. And with all this information, the company actually makes a short list, and then they finally choose the provider for this tool. This has been quite widely used in the last few years, in the last decade, I would say. And what we need to put on the table, okay, in this webinar is to what extent this process is actually the most suitable way of choosing a WFM tool for our company. So let's discuss this a little bit and looked at who is involved in this process, which is one of the key factors that later on will tell us how convenient or not this is for our company. Departments involved in this process are basically there are 5 main departments, and then 3 of them that sometimes they appear in the process, sometimes they don't. The first one is IT. We need the technical department. The WFM is technology, therefore there's got to be a participation of the IT department, and they need to join the revision and the review of the RFPs and prepare technical questions, mainly for the providers. So that is one of the main actors. The second one is operations. And operations is basically the department that will be using the tool. I mean, the WFM tool, the main user is not IT department, it's actually the operations department. And within the operations department, there are 3 layers that they will be using this tool mainly, which is on one side, the planning team, the WFM team, which they will be the administrators of this tool. On a second layer, we will have business managers and team leaders that they will be looking at some of the information stored in this system and entering some of the information as well, especially related to agents. And the third layer is the agents themselves, that normally they have an interface by which they can access the system to view their own information regarding the schedules, and secondly to perform certain actions to operate with their schedules, like vacation requests or training requests or overtime requests, for instance, okay, or shift swaps. Those are some examples. So we've got these 2. It is essential that these 2 are part of this process. Okay, without these 2, this cannot happen. The third department is project management, and project management here has a very heavy involvement, because someone has to manage the exchange of emails, documentation, setting up the calls, drive those calls, okay, the demos, etc. That there are quite a few for a number of providers, and coordinate amongst the different departments. So here, the PMs have quite a heavy task, okay, to perform here. Together with project management, we have the purchase department. The purchase department and procurement, normally, although they might be present from the very beginning, they tend to become way more active towards the end of the process, where there's a short list of providers, or there's maybe just one provider, and they are actually checking the price of this project. And that is when they come into place, especially with the negotiation and checking exactly, for instance, how much infrastructure has to be purchased by the company. Whether they are more active or not at the very beginning, the key is that they've got to be there as well, okay? But because they've got a role at some point in this process. And together with the purchase department, we've got finance department. And finance will be looking at the price, whether it's too expensive, whether it's not too expensive, whether the company can afford it, and what is the return of the investment of buying this type of tools. So these are the big five here, okay, that they've got to be there in an RFP process: IT, operations, project management, the purchase department, and finance. Now, together with these five, we have three additional actors in this process. One will be HR department. Why do we mention HR department? The reason for this is that normally when this type of software is deployed, it affects the shifts and the way in which the agents will actually come to work, okay, the time they start, the time they stop, what happens between shifts, etc. So the company, or most of the companies, want to keep an eye that whatever is going to happen with this tool, it does respect the legislation related to human resources. So that's why this department comes into play. Sometimes there's also some integrations related with HR, and they are necessary in that case, for instance, when this type of tool wants to be integrated with payroll. And then finally, we've got the last two potential actors. One are the external providers. That will be the companies that have been invited to this RFP process. It could be, as I said before, normally the number goes between 3 and 7. It could be more than 7. Okay, that's true. It could happen, but not normally. It goes actually in that range. Okay, and then potentially the internal providers could be invited as well, and that happens especially in certain scenarios when, by implementing a WFM tool, there's already an existing tool within the company that is supported by another provider that is going to be impacted or affected. And in that case, some of the companies actually invite these internal providers to be present in the RFP just to avoid conflicts or lack of compatibility between the new tool and the existing tool. So there are certain requests or exchange of information that it can be done at this moment, okay, and avoids potential problems in the future. So what we have so far is a number of factors that you can see is not a small list, okay, that are normally involved in this type of process. Now we're going to look at pros and cons, advantages and disadvantages. So what is the advantage of an RFP process? I think the biggest one, and especially the bigger the project, the more advantage this is it gives a structure to the process. Okay, a process that it could have many different pieces of information in different formats, explained in a different way. With this process, the companies are able to have a structured path for everybody and an homogeneous format for the information provided. and it makes very clear for all the participants what are the different steps that are going to be followed from moment one when providers are invited until the very end when the final decision is made. So that would be, I would say, the biggest and the first advantage. The second one, the main stakeholders will be present in the process. It's true that they are not active from the very beginning, all of them, as I explained before, but this process actually guarantees that any department that actually will be affected by this tool will be invited, and they will have their say about the tool, or at least they will have the information to know what is going to be implemented in the company. So that actually avoids potential problems in the future of a department not being involved. For instance, human resources. Okay, when a tool is implemented, and well, the shifts that are going to be implemented actually go against the internal rules of the company or against the labor legislation, for instance. So it gives the company that kind of guarantee. The third one applies to suppliers, okay, to providers, which is a relative quality, and I underline relative, I will explain it later on, a relative equality for suppliers, because all of them receive the information at the same time, okay, all of them have access to all the questions and all the answers asked for all of them to the company. They all have the same timings, they'll have exactly the same amount of time to deliver the response and the answers and the documentation, and that generates a frame of equality when participating in these kind of processes. The relative part will be explained in the next two slides, because this equality sometimes is a bit of a false equality, okay, or a forced equality. Together with the equality for suppliers, there's a very important one, which is the compliance with the internal protocols for the company that is pushing the RFP. These internal protocols is basically that some companies they have a policy to have at least 3 proposals when they are buying a new tool. Or, for instance, the public sector, by law, they need actually to start this RFP process or bidding process in order to be able to buy this kind of software. Okay. So the RFP process allows them to comply with this without any problem. Sometimes the content of the RFP or some of the parts of the RFP are heavily impacted by these internal protocols or legislation of a specific sector, with what contents have to be there as well. And the last 2 advantages are very close, which is they have to do with information. On one side, it allows the customer to have homogeneous information about the different tools, because the companies, the providers, are actually answering the same questionnaire, so they can easily compare the different providers using the answers. Okay, and that's actually quite handy, quite useful, and it will allow the companies as well to get a very detailed information on the different products, since they're actually preparing the questions for the RFP. If a company is very interested in having a very detailed information on functionalities or specific questions on the technical setup, they will be able to have very thorough answers and information provided by the suppliers. So it's quite clear that the process in itself is got advantages. I mean, when we actually got through the list, okay, it's common sense that it's a process that has a positive impact, okay, and it can bring benefits to the company. Now let's look at the other side, okay. Let's look at the B side of the situation. The disadvantages. The first 2 I would say are the main disadvantages, which is it involves too many parties. We were talking before that we need these top 5 departments, okay, IT, operations, finance, the purchase department, okay, to be involved. Now, sometimes it's very difficult to have someone representing each of these departments to join all the calls, all the meetings, all the demos, the reviewing of the information, etc., all the tasks involved with the RFP. And that requires a lot of coordination, and sometimes that is not really that easy because it is not a one-week process. Okay, it can be a lengthy process of even 2 months or even longer. The second one is related to this, which is the investment of time. Obviously, it depends on how the extent of the RFP. But in most of the cases, just the revision of all the answers requires a considerable amount of time that has to be invested by the company to be able to compare the different information provided, especially because normally some of the or most of the RFPs are actually quite lengthy, and the questions are not a yes or no type of question. They are open questions where allows the provider to give certain explanations on the questions or the functionalities asked. When reviewing the responses, okay, sometimes the companies might find that the answer provided is too broad or too ambiguous, too open, okay. They do answer the question, but to an extent, okay. It does not really give a specific answer. Now, if it was just one question or one provider, maybe that would be okay, but what you as a company that is pushing the RFP, start finding quite a few questions on this line, and from some of the providers, sometimes you get the feeling that the providers are not really answering specifically the question or some of the questions that are in the RFP process. Okay, and that can cause some difficulties. The fourth one, which is actually it could be a big problem, and sometimes it is not seen from the very beginning, is that since we've got quite a few actors involved, sometimes there's no one that has the full picture of the project. We've got finance, they understand the numbers. We've got IT, they understand the technical part. We've got operations, they will understand whether the functionalities of this software is good for them or not. We've got the purchase department, and they will look at the conditions, okay, and when this is going to happen, etc. We have HR, that they will see whether the tool actually fits within the HR legislation, okay, or internal rules or labor law, etc. But we need someone, okay, with the global overview to be able to check the information of the different branches. So maybe, technically speaking, one tool is not the best, okay, but it's really good with functionalities, okay. At pricing isn't needed, okay. So we need to have someone able to have this kind of overall view of the whole process to be able to have a correct assessment on the providers. And last one is that the information provided is confusing. This is slightly different to the one mentioned before about the responses, that it was too wide. In this case, it's basically it is not. I mean, some of the questions are not answered. Okay, so we don't really find that the answers provided are actually corresponding to that specific question. Okay, and that could happen with some of the questions in the RFP, both on the technical side of things and the functional side of things. So this is the B side of the situation. So we've got the advantages and disadvantages. Now, together with this, we have some items that I've called them the shadows of the RFPs. These shadows of the RFPs are little pieces, okay, that sometimes are not seen at the very beginning, and they come up as the process deploys. And they are actually, I just put a few of them, because there are more than the ones that you can see in the list. Okay, so I just selected what I consider are the main ones. Now, what is the importance of these shadows of the RFPs? That if we are not able to spot them, we might actually make either the wrong decision, or the RFP might not be the best process to select the tool. What would be the first one, for instance? The selection criteria. And I'm going to choose the example of the price. Let's imagine that the price is really the selection criteria for a tool. Well, if that is the case, that is only the price, we don't really need an RFP. We've got other tools, like for instance, the RFQ, that will get quotations from different companies, and you don't need to invest as much time as you have to do with an RFP. The second one, it is a pure formality. There's an internal protocol in the company saying, okay, we need 3 proposals. Now, this already, the provider has already been chosen, although has not been made official, okay? And still, the company has to go through the RFP. So they have to request proposals to other companies in order to have at least the minimum 3 proposals to comply with the internal protocols, okay? Well, it is an investment of time that sometimes is not necessary. Okay. The third one is basically we follow what the other ones are doing, because other companies are using RFPs, we use RFPs as well. And maybe it was good for them, but it might not be that good for us. Okay, so we need to be careful with this one. Okay, it's a process that is there in the market, but maybe it's not for everybody and not for all the cases. In other situations, the problem that we see is that the RFP has already been prepared, or the questions have already been prepared to benefit one of the vendors. Okay. So, for instance, if we know that we want to work with a specific vendor, and we know that that vendor is got forecasting tools for chat, there will be questions about that, because in that way the company will be able to answer that, and obviously it will check those firms as positive for them. Okay, so some of them are clearly designed for one specific provider. Now, if that is the case, we need to ask ourselves whether maybe we are investing too much time, okay, with an RFP, and we don't really need it, since you almost already have the vendor selected. In other cases, what we see is a disproportion between requirements on the RFP and then the real needs of the operation. When the company sends the requirements to the providers, there's a huge list, either technically or in functionality. But then, when the tool gets installed, operations actually does not need many of those functionalities. And there's a big gap sometimes between what happens at the end, what gets implemented, and what it was required on paper when the RFP started. Related to that is a problem that sometimes appear with the technical questions, so the technical part of the RFP, which is the lack of balance between functionality and the technical questions. Sometimes to comply with the technical part, it's so important that the functionalities get sacrificed. So at the end, the tool chosen is very good from the technical point of view, but then it hasn't got the functionalities that operations requires. And then operations comes back and says, okay, yeah, it works really well, but look, it doesn't do this, it doesn't do that, it doesn't do this whole thing. So that could be another big problem. There's no overall understanding or a global understanding of the responses. We mentioned that one before, okay, when there's no one with this kind of global overview of the RFP. We can also see sometimes that there's no budget. Okay, the company starts an RFP and there's no budget for the tool, or the budget available is clearly insufficient. Okay, so the company is investing a lot of time in a process to buy a tool that they cannot pay. And there are other ways of checking this. Okay, so that would be definitely one of the problems. And the last one is the lack of coherence between the initial proposal presented by the providers and then what happens at the very end when the tool gets implemented with the statement of work. And when you see the proposal and when you see what it gets implemented, there is actually a big difference there, and it's not exactly the same. So we have advantages, disadvantages, and then these kind of hidden corners with the shadows of the RFPs. So with these three pieces of information, we can actually ask ourselves, okay, when is an RFP more appropriate? Okay, or for what type of situations, for what type of companies? And I've put here in the slide 4 different situations. Okay, this could be more detailed. Okay, but I think with these 4 we will give a good overview of the 4 different scenarios. Definitely, when we are facing a complex project or a project which has got a big site with a lot of agents, the RFP will be a appropriate tool, because otherwise you might have a lot of information that it will affect a lot of different departments within the company, and often these companies, they've got different sites, sometimes even in different countries, etc. And the RFP will help you to amalgamate, okay, and put together all this information and all the people involved. So for sure, that will be one of the scenarios where this will be useful. The second one, lack of experience. The company has not implemented a WFM tool before. And if that is the case, an RFP might be handy because it will allow them to have a lot of information, and it will allow them to have homogeneous information from the different vendors. Okay, so it is a lengthy process, yes, but it will definitely help them to get to have the in-depth information that is needed in that moment. Related to that is the lack of market knowledge. In this case, it's not so much that they don't have experience, it's that they don't really know anything about the tools in the market. So, which is even 1 degree deeper from the lack of experience. So in that case, you really need very detailed information first from the different providers, so you can actually learn and compare what they are offering you. So in that case, it will be recommended an RFP. And the 4th one, the legal obligation, legal requirement, or when basically by law you have to do it, or by internal protocols. It could be that the internal protocol for purchasing software requires an RFP and minimum 3 proposals, or it could be that the company is in a specific sector that by law is got to follow that process. So for these 4 situations and these 4 different scenarios, we would recommend the use of an RFP. Now, alternatives if we are not using an RFP. Okay, if for whatever reason the disadvantages are bigger for us than the advantages, or we've got too many of these shadows that I mentioned before. So what can we do instead of the RFP? And I just put in the screen 3 different possibilities. Okay, one is the combination of demos and RFQ. RFQ is a request for quotation. So if especially here, if the price is got the main weight by far in the selection process, maybe you don't need an RFP. What you need basically is information about the costs, and then ask the vendors to provide a demo. And you would save quite a lot of time there, okay, by using this kind of alternative. The second one, demos and requests for information. Request for information is asking information about how the software works, licenses, functionalities, technical questions, etc. Okay, and this is normally used when there's a lack of there is not enough information, okay, about the different tools, and you can combine this with demos. Okay, so that is another way of doing this. And the third one, you forget about the RFP, and what you set up is basically three type of demos or meetings. One, so you understand the functional part, and the provider shows how the tool works for specific situations, how it does the forecasting, how it creates the schedules, how it can monitor the activity of the agents, how can the agents make their requests in the agent portal interface, etc. Okay, so functional demo, a technical demo, so IT people can ask their questions, okay, and they can make sure that from that point of view the tool is robust enough. And finally, the cost, okay, which will be looked by finance. But you don't have a questionnaire itself, okay, that you send beforehand. Okay, what you set up is the three different demos or three different meetings to discuss these three different topics. Yeah, those are the alternatives. So, with all this in mind, what will be the conclusion that we get? Okay, do we need an RFP, or we don't need an RFP to choose a WFM tool? And the conclusion here is that basically there's no one size fits all. Okay, there's no solution for everybody. Okay, there's a different approach depending on the company to handle an RFP process and whether you want to start this or not. You need to evaluate very, very carefully how many advantages you have, okay, how many disadvantages, and be very honest with the shadows of the RFPs. You already have a tool implemented, or you have already selected a vendor, or you are preparing the RFP for a specific provider. Don't complicate your life, okay? Just try to use a different process, okay? If you have already selected the vendor, okay, instead of an RFP. And the question that the company has to ask is, what is right for my organization? And that will actually give the direction that you want to follow. So 30 minutes, as we said at the very beginning. I hope that it was interesting for you. If you have questions, doubts, or you require clarification, or you want to know more about our opinion on RFPs, or how we approach them, or how we recommend to create an RFP, you can actually drop us a question in LinkedIn, and we will be answering all of them through the same platform in the contact details that you leave for us. Before we finish the webinar, just a reminder that there will be another one in November, the 26th of November, and sorry, in October, the 26th of October, and there will be a third one in mid-November. For next month, it will be the return of the investment. And with this, I thank everybody that joined the webinar, and have a good day.